Chapter 67. Although Changyangba strongly objected to Jianxin not having any guards, Jianxin was extremely firm on this matter. In the end, Changyangba could only agree to Jianxin's request. Once everything was discussed, Bai Dao spoke once more. According to the news I've received from the Imperial Palace, the Huayan sect has already received the news and is hurrying over to Lore City. They'll probably arrive by noon at the latest, so you should send Changyang Shoten away as soon as possible. Otherwise, it'll be too late. Everyone in the hall could not help but become stern when they heard that. Changbo stood up from his chair and said, "Then let your fourth young master pack up. I'll take him away on a hawk later." Afterward, everyone left the discussion hall. "Xianxia, let's go. Let's go to Mother's room. Mother has some things to tell you." As soon as they left the discussion hall, Bai Yuntian pulled Jianxin to her room. After entering her room, Bai Yuntian pulled Jianxin to a chair and sat down. Her face was currently covered in tears because she knew extremely well that they would not be able to see each other for a very long time after Jianxin left. At the same time, who knew how many hardships Jianxin would have to endure on the Tianyuan continent where people were sinister and the situation was complicated. Perhaps the worst-case scenario would be the last time they would see each other. "Xianxia, you're not young anymore, and you're about to leave soon. There are some things that Mother should tell you." Bai Yuntian's face was covered in crystalline tears as she said, "Xianxia, don't you find it very strange why you don't have a grandfather or a grandmother?" Jianxin nodded and said nothing. Bai Yuntian continued, "Xianxia, Mother isn't actually from the kingdom of Jessen. Instead, I'm from the Karl Empire, one of the 3 great empires on the continent. Our Bai family is a great clan that has existed for over 1,000 years in the Karl Empire. Our clan is large and our influence is far greater than the current Huayan sect. In Hellfire City of the Karl Empire, our Bai family has been the most powerful clan in Hellfire City for several hundred years. This is because your great-grandfather is a saint ruler, and other than him, there are 4 other great-grandfathers who are Heaven Saint Masters. They are all elders of the Bai family." At this point, Bai Yuntian sighed. "Unfortunately, good times don't last long. 30 years ago, when I was still young, your great-grandfather went out without any news, and he never came back. No one knew what happened. 20 years after your great-grandfather disappeared, 2 of the 4 elders of our Bai family went out to search for your great-grandfather. However, just 2 days after they left, a shocking piece of news came to our Bai family. The 2 elders who went out to search for your great-grandfather were actually killed in the wilderness." Bai Yuntian's face was filled with sorrow when she said this. This news is like a bolt out of the blue to our Bai family. The 2 elders were both Heaven Saint Masters. Even on the Tianyuan continent, they could be regarded as peak experts, but I never thought that the 2 of them would actually be killed. They did not even have the chance to escape. From this, our Bai family has realized that a powerful enemy has begun to plot against our Bai family. Perhaps your great-grandfather has already met with misfortune. It's a pity that the enemy didn't give us any time to catch our breath. On the night we learned that the 2 elders had been killed, a large group of mysterious people charged into our Bai family and began a massacre. They were extremely powerful, and the 2 remaining elders of the Bai family were unable to suppress them completely. In the end, they were killed by them. Seeing that even the 2 most powerful elders of the Bai family had died, there was no one left in the Bai family who could stop the enemy. At that time, your grandparents and a few loyal guards of the Bai family all died in battle to protect me and a group of people from the Bai family. In the end, only your uncle and I managed to escape. We hid in a small household in Hellfire City, which was how we managed to avoid being captured. Your uncle and I have been hiding for a few days. After everything calmed down, the 2 of us changed our appearances and concealed our identities. We escorted a caravan out of Hellfire City as mercenaries, and finally arrived in the kingdom of Jessen." Tears continuously flowed from Bai Yuntian's eyes, and her expression was filled with sorrow and pain. "Xianxia, the Bai family that was once incomparably glorious with thousands of people is now only the 2 of us and your uncle. You must remember that not only does the blood of Changyang Prefecture flow in your veins, half of it is also the blood of the Bai family. The continuation of our Bai family depends on you, so you must protect yourself well outside, understand? Jianshan nodded silently, but his heart was already in turmoil, unable to calm down for a long time. The impact of his mother's words on Jianshan was just too great. After a while, Jianshan finally calmed down and asked, "Mother, don't we know the identity of those mysterious people? Which faction they belong to?" Bai Yuntian shook her head. "We don't know. Your uncle and I were still young back then, so we didn't know much, so we didn't know who they were at all. The two elders of our Bai family probably knew, but they're already dead." As she spoke, Bai Yuntian took out a red brocade pouch from her bosom. She stared at it blankly, as if she was immersed in her memories. She murmured, "Before your grandfather passed away, he gave this brocade pouch to your mother. He said that this is our Bai family's heirloom, passed down from generation to generation. It has been passed down for thousands of years. He told me to take good care of it. Those mysterious people came to destroy our Bai family because of this brocade pouch." Jianshan's gaze fell on the red pouch and asked, "Mother, what's inside?" "There's only a piece of skin the size of a palm inside. As for what it's used for, I don't know." As she spoke, Bai Yuntian stuffed the red pouch into Jianshan's hands and said, "Xianxia, although this pouch only contains a piece of skin, since it's our family heirloom, it's definitely not that simple. Now that you're the only descendant of our Bai family, I should give this pouch to you. I hope you can take good care of it, but it's best if you don't take it out outside. Although it's very difficult to meet someone who knows what's inside, it's better to be safe than sorry." Jianshan tightly held the red pouch in his hands and silently nodded. Dong dong dong. At this moment, a series of knocks suddenly came from the door. Hearing the knocks, Bai Yuntian wiped the tears from her face and said, "Who is it?" There was no sound from outside. After quite a while, a voice rang out, "Sister, it's me." Jianshan became stunned when he heard the familiar voice, because he just happened to hear this voice before. It belonged to the middle-aged man called Bai Dao who had come from the imperial palace. A complicated expression flashed through Bai Yuntian's face when she heard the voice. She said, "Come in, come in." The door opened and a middle-aged man in black robes slowly walked in. It was Bai Dao. Bai Yuntian stood up and looked at Bai Dao. She bitterly said, "Brother, it's been 20 years. You've finally come to visit your sister. I thought you'd forgotten about me long ago." Jianshan's eyes narrowed slightly. From how his mother had addressed the middle-aged man, he could tell that he was his uncle. Sigh. Bai Dao let out a long sigh. "Sister, I'm sorry. It's all my fault. I haven't come to see you in the past 20 years. Actually, I haven't forgotten about you. It's just that the burden on my shoulders is just too heavy. I will definitely take revenge for the Bai family. I will only live for revenge in my life." Bai Yuntian sighed before turning to Jianshan. She gently said, "Xianxia, he's your uncle Bai Dao." "Uncle?" Jianshan called out. This was the first time he had heard of this uncle of his, and it was also the first time he had seen him. Bai Dao studied Jianshan and could not help but faintly smile. He said, "Xiangtian, I've heard about your achievements in Kargath Academy from the Imperial Palace. Very good. You really are a descendant of our Bai family. I hope you work hard and don't disappoint us all." With that, Bai Dao suddenly became stern. He said to Bai Yuntian, "Sister, I know you don't want Xiangtian to leave, but there's nothing we can do about it. Changyang Prefecture is not the Huayun sect's opponent right now. If we leave Xiangtian in Changyang Prefecture, not only will it be difficult to protect him, it won't bring any benefits to Changyang Prefecture either. Perhaps Changyang Prefecture will end up like my Bai family. Let's get Xiangtian to leave as soon as possible. If we're too late, he won't be able to leave even if he wants to." Bai Yuntian gently nodded. She understood that the imperial family was unwilling to stand on their side. Afterward, Bai Yuntian prepared some necessities and some clothes for Jianshan with tears streaming down her face before leaving the room with Jianshan. Jianshan's aunts, Changyang Ba and Changbo were already there when they arrived in the backyard of Changyang Prefecture. The large eagle was sitting there obediently. Changyang, who grabbed Jianshan's arm and solemnly looked at him. He said in concern, "Brother, you have to take care of yourself outside, okay?" Jianshan nodded and smiled. "Don't worry, brother. I'll definitely take care of myself. But don't slack off after I leave. You have to study more battle techniques. Changyang, who firmly nodded and firmly said, I will. Brother, I've dragged you down this time because of my lack of strength. I'll definitely work hard on cultivation in the future. At this moment, Jianxin's sister, Changyang Mingyue, arrived before Jianxin and passed a pouch to Jianxin. She said, Brother, this is a protective talisman I've made for you. I hope you'll be safe outside. You have to keep it with you. Changyang Mingyue was now 18 and had become a slender young lady. She was as beautiful as a flower, capable of causing the downfall of nations. Jianxin accepted the protective talisman from Changyang Mingyue. Although he knew that the protective talisman would not bring him any substantial benefits, it was still a token of his sister's goodwill. Thank you, sister. I'll definitely take good care of this protective talisman. Jianxin smiled. At this moment, Changyang Ba took out a ring from his bosom and said, Xianxia, I've already prepared this space ring for you. I originally planned on giving it to you after you graduated from the academy, but it looks like I don't need to wait that long. I'll give it to you right now. I've already prepared some necessary items for you inside. Thank you, Father. Jianxin silently accepted the space ring with mixed feelings. Xianxia, space rings are extremely valuable items on the Tianyuan continent. You can't reveal this space ring before you're strong enough, just in case you attract unnecessary trouble, Changyang Ba said solemnly. Chapter 68. After bidding farewell to everyone, Jianxin was led by Chang Bo onto the hawk and flew away from Lore City. Jianxin lowered his head as he sat on the back of the hawk. He stared blankly at the large city several thousand meters below. His emotions were extremely complicated. This was the second time he had left Changyang Prefecture and Lore City in the 15 years since he had arrived in this world. The first time he had left was to study in Kargath Academy, but this time was completely different. Jianxin understood that he would not be able to see his family again for a very long time after he left this time. Moreover, he would have to travel alone on the extremely dangerous Tianyuan continent that was filled with the aura of slaughter. He would have to rely on himself for everything. Jianxin did not even know if he would have the chance to see his family again in the future. After all, he had already understood the situation of the Tianyuan continent from the books. This was a world where the strong were respected. Everything on the Tianyuan continent was based on strength. It was much more dangerous than the Jianghu of his previous life. With his current strength, no one knew what would happen in the future if he were to travel on this extremely dangerous continent. Chang Bo glanced at Jianxin, who was deep in thought as he sat on the hawk. He said, Fourth young master, everything will depend on you from now on. You must be careful when you travel alone on the continent. I know what to do, Chang Bo, Jianxin replied softly without even turning his head. Chang Bo stared deeply at Jianxin and sighed inside. He did not say anything else. The hawk flew straight towards the sun that had just appeared at the horizon. The fierce wind whistled in their ears, causing Jianxin and Chang Bo's hair and clothes to flutter. The flying eagle flew past several cities and villages of various sizes. Just as the sun was about to set, the flying eagle finally flew over a small city. Looking at the small city below, Jianxin suddenly said, Chang Bo, send me off here. Chang Bo lowered his head and looked at the small city below. He nodded, all right. Afterward, Chang Bo controlled the hawk to stop 10 kilometers away from the city. Jianxin jumped off the hawk and turned to Chang Bo, saying, Chang Bo, you should hurry back. The Huayun sect has probably already arrived in our Changyang prefecture. Chang Bo nodded from the hawk and said, Fourth young master, take care of yourself. Jianxin waved his hand at Chang Bo, then walked towards the city 10 kilometers away without looking back. Chang Bo sat on the hawk, staring at Jianxin's back. Only when Jianxin disappeared from his line of sight did he sigh and mutter to himself, Fourth young master, I hope that when we meet again, you can give me a pleasant surprise. The eagle's wings flapped violently. With a burst of sand and pebbles, smoke and dust filled the air. It had already brought Uncle Chang up into the sky and returned in the direction they came from. Right now, the sun was about to set, and the sky was dusk. When Jianshan arrived at the road leading to the small city, there were still many people walking towards the city. However, they were mostly mercenaries riding various magic beasts and caravans. Jianshan's appearance naturally attracted the attention of some people. Many mercenaries looked at him with vigilance, but when they saw Jianshan's young face and saw his age, the vigilance in their eyes immediately disappeared. Jianshan sized up these mercenaries riding various magic beasts. He saw that these mercenaries looked to be in their 20s to 50s. Some were wearing armor, some were wearing beast skins, and some were wearing clothes. When he got closer, Jianshan could clearly feel that these mercenaries had a bloody aura. With his rich experience, he naturally knew that these mercenaries had been baptized by slaughter. 10 kilometers was not a long distance, so Jianshan arrived very quickly. Jianshan raised his head and looked at the 20-meter-high city wall in front of him. The city wall had clearly been there for many years, and it was not maintained for many years. The merciless passage of time had left clear marks on the tall city wall. Above the city gate, 3 words were written in flamboyant calligraphy: White Cloud City. "Hey, stop, what are you doing?" Just as Jianshan passed by the city gate, he was stopped by a guard. Jianshan chuckled. He took out a few gold coins from his spatial belt and stuffed them into the guard's hand. He said, "Brother, I'm a mercenary. I've come to White Cloud City with a mission." The guard glanced at the gold coins in his hand from the corner of his eye. He immediately put on a smile and said, "Oh, since you have a mission, I won't delay your precious matters. Go on in." After entering White Cloud City, Jianshan walked another 2 to 3 kilometers and arrived at a bustling street. Although the sun had already set, the street was still bustling. There was an endless stream of people coming and going on the streets. On both sides of the street, there were shops that sold all kinds of goods. The ground of the street was completely pieced together by large pieces of stone. The surface was very smooth, so the inside was very flat. Even if a vehicle was running on it at a slow speed, it would not feel the slightest bit of bump. Jianshan rubbed his stomach. Then, he looked at a restaurant on the street and walked in. He had not eaten for the entire day, so his stomach was hurting from hunger. "Sir, please come in." Jianshan found an empty table and sat down under the warm welcome of a waiter. "Sir, would you like to stay in the restaurant or have a meal?" The waiter was a young man who was about 20 years old. He had a professional smile on his face, which made him look very friendly. Jianshan glanced at the mercenaries who were chatting loudly in the restaurant and said calmly, "I'm going to stay in the restaurant and have a meal. What kind of food do you have here?" Then, the waiter immediately introduced Jianshan to all kinds of things in the restaurant. However, the dishes that he introduced were all the most expensive in the restaurant. This was because the waiter could already tell that Jianshan was a rich young master from the luxurious clothes that he was wearing. Jianshan did not care about the price of these dishes and casually ordered a few dishes that he had not tried before. After eating and drinking to his heart's content, Jianshan booked a medium-sized room in the restaurant and went straight into the room to rest. This restaurant was obviously not high-end. The furnishings in this medium-sized room were very simple. Compared to Changyang Prefecture, it was simply worlds apart. Other than a wooden bed made of hard wood, there was only a table and a few chairs in the room. Other than that, there was nothing else. Even so, the room was very clean. Jianshan never had the habit of being picky. This kind of room was already quite satisfactory for him. After closing the door, Jianshan walked to the bed and sat down. Then, he took out the space ring that his father gave him before he left and opened it to check the items inside. The space ring was indeed a high-grade item. The space inside was much larger than a belt. It was close to 100 square meters. In the center of the space ring, there was a small pile of items. There were not many items. Compared to the space of 100 square meters, this small pile of items could not even fill up a corner. Within the pile of items, there were several thousand purple coins that flickered with a purple light and over 10,000 gold coins that shone with a golden light. Other than these items, there was also a small pile of monster cores. There were only around 40 to 50 of them. Class 2 monster cores were the majority. There were only around 10 Class 3 monster cores and 1 Class 4 monster core. Looking at the items in the space ring, Jianshan felt warmth in his heart for a moment. Although there were not many items, they were all very practical and just happened to be what Jianshan needed. From this, it was enough to see how much Changyangba cared about Jianshan. Jianshan carefully kept the space ring close to his chest. He did not forget what his father had told him before he left. Before he became strong enough, he could not expose the space ring to others. This was because space rings were not as common as space belts. Space rings were very precious in the Tianyuan continent. Although there were many people who possessed space rings, all of them were either powerful or were the descendants of famous families. They had enough strength to protect their belongings. Sitting cross-legged on the bed, Jianshan took out a few monster cores from his space belt and held them in his hand. Then he slowly closed his eyes and entered a state of cultivation. The energy within the monster cores was absorbed by Jianshan at an extremely terrifying speed. At this moment, if someone was present, they would definitely see the monster cores in Jianshan's hand emitting a faint glow. The energy leaking from the monster cores was so dense that it formed a blurry, visible energy ribbon that enveloped Jianshan's body. At the same time, the Class 1 monster cores in Jianshan's hand rapidly shrank in size. Ever since Jianshan broke through to the Saint Realm and 2 specks of light appeared in his dantian, his path of cultivation had become extremely difficult. Although the speed at which he absorbed the energy of the world had increased by more than 10 times, he only absorbed a pitiful 1% of it. Although the speed at which he absorbed the energy of the monster cores was much faster than before, the consumption of the monster cores was so great that it was not something that Jianshan could bear. It only took 2 hours for Jianshan to absorb the Class 1 monster cores in his hand. Then, Jianshan continued to take out several Class 1 monster cores from his space belt and continued to cultivate. Fortunately, he still had a few hundred Class 1 and Class 2 monster cores in his space belt. Although it was not much, it could at least sustain his cultivation for a few days. Moreover, there were more than 10 Class 3 monster cores and 2 Class 4 monster cores in the space belt that his father gave him. The next day, when the sun had risen high in the sky, Jianshan woke up from his cultivation state. That night, he had used another 40 to 50 monster cores just for cultivation alone. Sigh. Feeling the rapidly decreasing number of monster cores in his space belt, Jianshan let out a long sigh. His face was full of helplessness. The purple and green specks of light in his dantian had really brought him endless distress. After calming down, Jianshan walked out of the room and directly left the restaurant, strolling on the street outside. The morning air was particularly clear, and the fiery red sun in the sky had not yet released its scorching heat. The warm sunlight shining on one's body gave a very comfortable feeling. There were many mercenaries hurrying about on the street, and from time to time, there would be pairs of peddlers slowly flowing along the street. Chapter 69. In the Tianyuan continent, no matter which country or city it was, the mercenary union would always be built in the center of the city. Beside the mercenary union, there would always be a bank that was not much smaller than the mercenary union. Although the White Cloud City was only a second-tier city, it still occupied a very large area. Jianshan walked on the streets for an hour before finally arriving at the most bustling street in the center of the city. In front of him, there was a 20-meter-tall building that stood there silently like a giant beast in the deep sea. It was the Mercenary Union. The Mercenary Union was very large, and the shape of the building looked more like a kind of magical beast. At the entrance, there was an endless stream of mercenaries in various outfits. Jianshan directly entered the Mercenary Union. Although this was his first time coming to such a place, he had already read about the procedures to become a mercenary in the Academy's library. There were many people in the Mercenary Union. The mercenaries who needed to go through the procedures were lined up like a long dragon. The dozen or so windows in front of the counter were filled with people. However, they were all here to hand over missions. The innermost window for registering as a mercenary was very cold. Jianshan came to the window for registering as a mercenary and said, "Hello, I would like to register as a mercenary." The person in charge of registering as a mercenary was an old man. He looked to be in his 50s or 60s. Even so, his face was rosy and his old eyes were bright. The old man looked at Jianshan indifferently and said calmly, "To register as a mercenary, you need to have the strength of a saint. Have you reached that level?" "I have already reached that standard," Jianshan said. The old man looked at Jianshan carefully and then took out a piece of paper. At the same time, he asked, "What's your name?" Jianshan, who wanted to conceal his identity, naturally would not use the name Changyang Shoten. So, he directly reported the name he used in his previous life. "How old are you this year?" The old man continued to ask. Hearing that, Jianshan thought for a moment before replying, 20 years old. Jianshan could not reveal his true age because a 15-year-old saint was just too rare on the Tianyuan continent. Once this matter spread, it would probably cause him some unnecessary trouble. In the Kargath Academy, although many people knew that Jianshan was extremely talented, only the principal and vice principal knew his true age. A 20-year-old saint was considered quite common on the Tianyuan continent. Moreover, his body had developed far more than ordinary people since he was young, so no one would suspect him even if he said that he was 20 years old. Right now, he looked no different from a 20-year-old youth. "What level of strength have you reached?" The old man asked as he took notes on the paper. "Junior Saint," Jianshan replied. The process of registering as a mercenary was very simple. After paying a silver coin, Jianshan officially became a mercenary and obtained his mercenary badge. However, with his current strength, he could only obtain the lowest mercenary badge. After obtaining the badge, Jianshan did not stay in the mercenary union for long and directly left. After asking around, he came to a store that sold medicine. Although there were Radiant Saint Masters who could heal all kinds of injuries on the Tianyuan continent, there were extremely few of them. As a result, Radiant Saint Masters possessed a lofty status on the Tianyuan continent. Very few mercenaries could afford to hire a Radiant Saint Master. Only large mercenary groups could afford to hire a Radiant Saint Master. It was basically impossible for small mercenary groups and individual mercenaries to obtain information on Radiant Saint Masters without paying an exorbitant price. There were countless mercenaries on the Tianyuan continent, and countless people died almost every day. Since Radiant Saint Masters were in short supply, there was naturally a need to use medicine to heal. Although the effects of medicine were worlds apart from the healing of Radiant Saint Masters, it was accepted by most mercenaries. This was because normal medicine was extremely cheap apart from high-quality medicines. Although this pharmacy wasn't small, it was still packed with people. Moreover, this pharmacy wasn't like the mercenary union. The soundproofing facilities in the pharmacy were too good. Under the loud voices of the mercenaries, the entire pharmacy seemed to be very noisy. There were many people buying medicine in the store. There was already a long line of people. Jianshan glanced around and then stood in a line with fewer people. "May I ask what you need?" Very soon, it was Jianshan's turn. The clerk sitting at the counter greeted him warmly. "I need some herbs. Do you sell herbs here?" Jianshan asked. The shop assistant looked at Jianshan strangely. This was the first time he had encountered someone who didn't come here to buy medicine but herbs. Although he was very curious about Jianshan's request, the shop assistant still replied, "Of course we're selling. Sir, what kind of herbs do you need? As long as we have them, we can take them out." "I need qilin grass, mop grass, vanilla grass, skeleton grass, sawtooth grass, antelope flower, root flower, lily, tortoise fungus. Do you have these here?" Jianshan listed more than a dozen herbs in a single breath. The clerk nodded without any hesitation and said, "Yes, these herbs are all very common. They are not very expensive. We have all of them. May I ask how many you need?" Jianshan's face showed a trace of happiness. He directly took out a gold coin and placed it in front of the counter, saying, "Give me some of each." These herbs were all very common species. 1 gold coin was enough to buy a cart full of them. Seeing the gold coin on the table, the clerk's eyes lit up. He immediately said, "Okay, please wait for a moment. I will go get them for you now." After saying that, the clerk directly entered the store. After taking the herbs he needed, Jianshan left the store. Then, without stopping, he walked out of the city. He arrived at a small forest 10 miles away from the city. He dug up some soft mud and collected some leaves. After putting them into his space belt, he returned to White Cloud City. After buying some ordinary clothes in White Cloud City, Xianxia arrived at a secluded alley. He hid in a hidden corner and looked around. After confirming that there was no one around, Xianxia immediately took out a small portion of the herbs he had bought from the store. He first crushed the herbs into powder before mixing them with a small amount of water. After that, he added some soft mud from the deep soil. Finally, he ground a few leaves into powder and squeezed them dry. The pitiful amount of juice dripped out. Once he was done, Xianxia directly grabbed the mixture and carefully smeared it on his face. Very quickly, when Xianxia raised his head again, his appearance had completely changed. At this moment, Xianxia looked like a completely different person. Even if someone familiar with him saw his current appearance, they wouldn't be able to recognize him. This was because Xianxia's appearance now looked like a completely different person. His originally handsome face had become ordinary. Even his eyebrows and eyelashes had been modified by him, making them even shorter than before. The only thing that hadn't changed about him was his pair of magnetic eyes and his skinny figure. Xianxia didn't stop because of this. Immediately after, the silver white light wind sword appeared in his hand. His body suddenly turned around beautifully, causing his long hair to flutter in the wind. At this time, a silver light flashed and the light wind sword passed through Xianxia's head at a speed that was hard to see with the naked eye. Xianxia's long hair that reached his waist was neatly cut off, leaving only the length of his shoulder. After that, Xianxia immediately changed his clothes. He changed out of the expensive silk and satin that he originally wore and put on the rough clothes that he had just bought from the store. After dressing up, Xianxia once again looked like a completely different person. Even if someone familiar with Xianxia saw his current appearance, they wouldn't be able to recognize him. Xianxia once again checked his body to make sure that he didn't miss anything. After making sure that his clothes were flawless, he set fire to his original clothes and walked out of the alley. When he arrived at the Mercenary Union again, Xianxia directly went to the place where missions were accepted. The missions in the Mercenary Union were divided into 5 ranks: S, A, B, C, and D. The highest was S rank and the lowest was D. At the same time, the mercenaries were also divided into 5 ranks. Xianxia was currently only a D rank mercenary, so he could only accept D rank missions. A mercenary's rank was determined by the amount of honor you accumulated from completing missions and your own strength. AD rank mercenary's strength had to be at least at the saint level, while AC rank mercenary's strength had to be at least at the great saint level. Based on this, an S rank mercenary's strength had to be at least at the Earth Saint Master level. Even if one's strength had reached the Earth Saint Master level, without the corresponding honor points, it was impossible to become an S rank mercenary. As a result, there were no shortcuts to becoming a mercenary. There were many D rank missions, and many of them were extremely boring. If it wasn't to help someone find something lost in White Cloud City, it was to help a shop buy something or deliver something. None of these things caught Xianxia's interest. Right now, Xianxia's main goal was to find a mission that would allow him to leave the kingdom of Jessan. He knew that the Huayun sect's influence in the kingdom of Jessan was just too great. Although his disguise was flawless, no one could guarantee that his identity would be exposed and he would be hunted down by the Huayun sect. Right now, the best method was to leave the kingdom of Jessan. No matter how great the Huayun sect's influence was, it was still limited to the kingdom of Jessan. It was a pity that there were very few D-rank missions that required a mercenary to leave the country. This was because the missions that required a mercenary to leave the country were of a higher level. At the very least, they wouldn't be assigned to D-rank missions. As a result, Xianxia couldn't find a single D-rank mission even after looking through all of them. Chapter 70. After leaving the Mercenary Union, Xianxia directly arrived at a place where the merchants gathered in White Cloud City. The place was extremely spacious, so it was where the merchants stored their goods. At the same time, the place was heavily guarded, so there was no need to worry about being stolen. When Xianxia arrived, there were already many merchants bustling about. Everyone was preparing to leave. At the same time, there were many mercenaries riding various magical beasts. Of course, there were also some mercenaries riding horses. Horses were the most common and cheapest form of transportation on the Tianyuan continent. At the same time, they were also the lowest form of transportation. At this moment, a young man who was busy moving goods passed by Genshin. Genshin immediately extended his hand to stop him and asked, "Brother, may I ask which of these merchants are leaving the kingdom of Jessin?" The young man glanced at Genshin in some doubt before pointing at a larger group of merchants in the distance. "That group is leaving the kingdom of Jessin." Genshin glanced in the direction the young man was pointing at. He saw several dozen carriages filled with goods parked there. There was a large group of mercenaries guarding the goods in the surroundings. A middle-aged man in luxurious robes was directing the workers. Genshin could tell with a single glance that the middle-aged man was the person in charge of the merchant group. He immediately walked over and arrived before the middle-aged man. He asked, "Uncle, may I ask if your merchant group is leaving the kingdom of Jessin?" The middle-aged man studied Genshin cautiously when he heard that. He asked, "Why are you asking this?" Genshin chuckled, "Uncle, if your merchant group is leaving the kingdom of Jessin, can I join you? I'm not very powerful, but I'm still a first-class mercenary. I don't want any payment from you either, so is that all right?" The middle-aged man looked relieved and said indifferently, "Sure, but you have to follow us closely on the road. Also, you have to pay for the expenses along the way. We won't reimburse you for any expenses. If there are bandits blocking the way, you have to contribute and fight with us." On the Tianyuan continent, some of the weaker mercenaries would usually form groups or join large merchant groups if they wanted to travel between kingdoms. Not only was the journey between kingdoms extremely long, but it was also extremely dangerous. Not only would there be bandits on the continent at any time, but there would also be magical beasts. In certain special environments, it would even be very common to be attacked by magical beasts. As a result, almost every merchant group or mercenary group would welcome anyone who wanted to join them. Normally, they would not turn anyone away. After all, an extra person was an extra source of strength. Just a little bit of strength might be enough to save their lives. Genshin agreed to the middle-aged man's request without any hesitation. "Our merchant group will set off in an hour. Go prepare yourself." With that, the middle-aged man no longer paid any attention to Genshin. He continued to instruct the young men to move the goods. With that, Genshin immediately hurried to a place in White Cloud City that specialized in selling mounts. After spending 50 gold coins on a good horse, he returned to where the merchant group had gathered and quietly waited for the merchant group to set off. An hour passed very quickly. Genshin rode his mount and followed behind the merchant group, slowly making his way to the city gates. Although many of the mercenaries in charge of escorting the merchant group cast curious gazes at Genshin, no one asked him about his origins. This was because this large caravan was made up of 3 medium-sized caravans. Due to the long journey and unknown dangers, the 3 caravans had hired 3 mercenary groups, and many of them were individual mercenaries. The total number of mercenaries and coachmen was no less than 500. It was normal for them to encounter unfamiliar faces. Very soon, Genshin followed the merchant group to the gates of White Cloud City. Naturally, the person in charge of the merchant group would negotiate with the guards there. The merchant group did not stay there for long. Once they were done, the merchant group slowly set off from the city. "Wait a moment." At this moment, a middle-aged man in armor quickly walked down from the tower. He held a scroll of paper in his hand. The middle-aged man directly arrived before the city gates, and then he passed the scroll in his hand to a guard and said, "Paste this portrait on the city gates. At the same time, get the best artist in White Cloud City to draw the person in the portrait and paste it on the streets and alleys of the city. Capture anyone who looks like the person in the portrait immediately. Kill them without mercy if they resist." "Yes, Commander. Commander." A guard immediately took the scroll of paper from the middle-aged man and opened it before pasting it on the city walls. "The person in the portrait is a fugitive of the Jessin Kingdom. All of you, keep a close eye on the people in the portrait. Compare them to the person in the portrait. Don't ever let the fugitive escape. Do you understand? The middle-aged man ordered loudly again. His voice was so loud that even some people who were far away could hear him clearly. When the guard pasted the portrait on the city walls, the person in the portrait appeared before everyone's eyes. It was a young man who seemed to be in his teens, at most in his 20s. The young man had a dignified appearance and was extremely handsome. Although it was only a portrait, the person in the portrait was extremely lifelike, just like a real person. Just from this point alone, it could be seen that the person who drew the portrait was extremely skilled. Only after the portrait was pasted on the city walls did the commander wave his hand. He said to the waiting merchant group, "All right, you can all go." The caravan blocking the city gate continued to move out of the city, but at this time, the number of guards guarding the city gate had increased by several times. The original dozen guards had increased to over 100. Every person entering or leaving the city gate would be stopped by the guards and then compared with the portraits pasted on the city wall. When Xianxia passed by the city gates and saw the portrait on the city walls, his gaze suddenly froze. That was because the person in the portrait was actually his original appearance. Seeing this, Xianxia couldn't help being shocked by the Huayun sect's strength. This place was over 10,000 kilometers away from Lore City. He had only left Lore City yesterday morning and arrived at White Cloud City in the evening. During this time, not only did the Huayun sect perfectly draw his appearance, they even sent it to White Cloud City in such a short time. Just this kind of efficiency was enough to cause one to tremble. Furthermore, Xianxia didn't believe that the Huayun sect only wanted him in White Cloud City. Right now, all the cities in the kingdom of Jesson had already received his wanted list. Thinking of this, Xianxia couldn't help but inwardly rejoice that he had already changed his appearance. Otherwise, if he was recognized with his current strength, it would be very difficult for him to leave White Cloud City. Xianxia rode on his horse and followed the merchant group out of the city. Just as he passed by the city gates, the guards on both sides of the gates cast sharp gazes on his face. However, Xianxia's appearance had already undergone a complete transformation. Even if someone familiar with Xianxia walked in front of him, they wouldn't be able to recognize him, let alone these guards who had never seen him before. Without any obstructions, Xianxia blended into the merchant group as a mercenary and smoothly left White Cloud City. Then, the merchant group continued to move forward along the trade route like a long dragon. This large merchant group was made up of 3 medium-sized merchant groups. Their destination was the Blue Wind Empire, which was the closest to the kingdom of Jesson. As the merchant group was carrying large carts of goods, their speed wasn't very fast. Even though White Cloud City was very close to the border fortress of the kingdom of Jesson, it would take at least 2 to 3 days to reach the border fortress. As for the journey to the Blue Wind Empire, it would take at least half a month. Xianxia's gaze landed on a luxurious carriage in the distance. Not only was this carriage larger, but it was also pulled by 4 Tier 1 demonic beasts that were good at running. Around the carriage were several powerful mercenaries riding on demonic beasts. Moreover, the middle-aged man who agreed to let Xianxia join the merchant group was also around. It seemed like they were all guarding the luxurious carriage. Xianxia could vaguely guess that the person sitting in the carriage was either the boss of the merchant group or someone important. This was because there were only 2 such luxurious carriages in the entire merchant group. After traveling on the official road for 4 days, the merchant group finally arrived at the border fortress of the kingdom of Jesson. The border fortress of the kingdom of Jesson was a huge wall that stretched for several miles. It was more than 50 meters tall and 20 meters thick. From afar, it looked like a giant dragon that was entrenched on the ground. It was an awe-inspiring sight. When Xianxia arrived in front of the wall, a huge shadow instantly enveloped him. The 50-meter-tall wall completely blocked the setting sun, causing the light in front of the wall to dim. The majestic aura was enough to shock anyone who saw this wall for the first time. It was as if the thing in front of them was a terrifying monster in the deep sea. Xianxia raised his head to look at the wall that served as the first line of defense for the kingdom of Jesson. He was extremely shocked. He had seen many walls in his past life, but none of them could compare to the one before him. Even the largest wall he had seen in the past was only 20 meters tall. Compared to the 50-meter wall before him, Wu Ning was like an adult compared to a child. What a huge wall! Who knows how long it took to build such a huge wall? Jianshan sighed as he looked at the wall before him. A mounted mercenary next to Jianshan curled his lips in disdain. He glanced at Jianshan and smiled. The scale of this wall can only be considered average in the Tianyuan continent. Almost every kingdom has one. With that, the mercenary looked at Jianshan from head to toe and continued, "You probably haven't been to the 3 great empires yet. Let me tell you, the border fortresses of the 3 empires have walls that are 100 meters tall and 50 meters thick. They are much more majestic than this. This wall can't compare to them at all." Jianshan turned his head to look at the mercenary who had just spoken. He was in his 20s and had a common face. His skin was rather dark, and he wore coarse clothes. He seemed very ordinary. If there's a chance in the future, you must visit the 3 great empires. Jianshan chuckled. Chapter 71. Jianshan faintly smiled. He clasped his hands at the mercenary and said, "Looks like you've been on the Tianyuan continent for quite some time." The mercenary smiled faintly. "It's not that long. It's only been a few years. It's nowhere near as long as the mercenaries who have been on the Tianyuan continent for decades or even centuries." "May I ask for your name?" Jianshan asked again. "Amuyun. What about you?" The mercenary was clearly a rather easygoing person. "I'm Jianshan," Jianshan replied. He had already decided that he would use the name Jianshan on the Tianyuan continent in the future. Afterward, Jianshan and Mu Yun began to chat casually. They talked about a few interesting things that had happened on the Tianyuan continent. Although this was the first time Jianshan had ventured out, he had basically learned a few of the not-so-secretive matters of the Tianyuan continent from his time in Kargath Academy. Jianshan even knew a few things that had happened in the past. Mu Yun, on the other hand, had spent quite a few years on the Tianyuan continent, so he was extremely experienced. The 2 of them could be said to be mutually beneficial, so they talked very enthusiastically along the way. Unknowingly, the 2 of them had become even closer. When the caravan slowly passed through the huge gates of the fortress, Jianshan discovered a few portraits of himself on the walls. The words Changyang Shoten were written at the bottom of the portraits. The bounty on the portraits was extremely generous as well. If they found traces or clues of Changyang Shoten and were confirmed to be correct, they would be rewarded with 1,000 purple coins. If they used the traces or clues to capture Changyang Shoten, the person who reported the information would receive an additional 4,000 purple coins. A single gold coin was enough to feed a family of 3 for a month. A single purple coin could be exchanged for 100 gold coins. 1,000 purple coins was an extremely large amount of wealth to the majority of mercenaries. It was enough for them to buy a house in the city and live a carefree life. As a result, this reward was an irresistible temptation to the majority of mercenaries. The most tempting reward was undoubtedly the last one. Anyone who captured Changyang Shoten and handed him over to the Huayan sect would immediately receive 100,000 purple coins. Looking at the generous reward that was enough to move anyone, a cold light flashed through Jianshan's indifferent eyes. "Huayan sect, you really think too highly of me. You actually gave me such generous rewards. Not only did you place a bounty on me in the entire kingdom of Jessen, even the mercenary union has issued a mission for me." Jianshan sneered inside. However, he also felt a deep sense of helplessness. On the Tianyuan continent, everything depended on strength. Right now, his strength was insufficient. Faced with the Huayan sect's bounty, he could only change his identity and leave his home, the place he grew up in, and the kingdom of Jessen. Let alone him, even the Changyang prefecture, one of the 4 great clans of Lore City, had no way to reverse the situation. Sigh. Jianshan inwardly sighed. At this moment, he couldn't help but think of his mother, Bai Yuntian's reluctant and sorrowful appearance when he left. Thinking of this, Jianshan's eyes revealed a trace of warmth that he had never felt before. However, his eyes immediately became resolute. At this moment, he had already decided that in the future, He would wholeheartedly focus on cultivation to increase his strength. Otherwise, with the Huayan sect as large as before, he would never be able to return to the kingdom of Jessen. He would never be able to see his mother again, and he would never be able to continue enjoying this hard-earned motherly love. In his previous life, Jianxin had been an orphan. He had never experienced the care and concern of his family. Now, not only had the heavens allowed him to reincarnate, they had even bestowed upon him a happy family. In Jianxin's heart, he greatly cherished this hard-earned motherly love and those family members who had truly cared for him. Some people who had lived in happy families since childhood might not be able to understand Jianxin's feelings. However, after being alone for his entire life, Jianxin greatly desired to have family. After all, it was unavoidable for a person to feel a little lonely. On both sides of the gate, there were nearly 200 soldiers standing guard. Their sharp eyes swept over the faces of everyone who passed through the gate. Once they discovered someone whose face they couldn't see clearly, they would be stopped by these guards and carefully compared to the portraits pasted on the wall. Only after confirming that there were no mistakes would they be allowed to leave. Although many of the people stopped were mercenaries with decent strength, they didn't dare to act rashly in front of the border stronghold of the kingdom of Jessen. This was because there were several 100,000 soldiers in the stronghold, and there was no lack of experts among them. If they were to clash with the guards here, their fates could be imagined. The gate of the stronghold was extremely large. Even if 5 carriages were to travel side by side, it wouldn't feel crowded at all. Just as Jianxin's caravan was about to leave the stronghold, a smaller caravan caught up with them at a much faster speed than Jianxin's caravan. When they saw the portraits pasted on the wall of the stronghold, they immediately began to discuss among themselves. Who is the person in the portrait? Why is there a bounty for him everywhere? I didn't expect that even the border stronghold of the kingdom of Jessen would have his portrait pasted on the wall. It seems like this person must have committed many serious crimes. When I passed by 3 cities, his portrait was pasted all over the city. Now, even the mercenary union has issued a bounty for him. That's right. It seems like this person must have committed some serious crime or offended some big shot. Right now, the mercenary union has already raised the bounty for him to an A-rank mission. Furthermore, they have also removed the requirement for mercenaries to accept this mission. This way, even AD-rank mercenary can accept this mission. That's right. That's right, and the commission is extremely high. As long as you find traces of Changyang Xiangtian, you'll be rewarded with 1,000 purple coins. If you catch someone based on the traces, you'll be rewarded with an additional 4,000 purple coins. What is a mere few thousand? If you can directly capture him and send him to the Huayan sect, you can directly receive 100,000 purple gold. 100,000? Just thinking about it is frightening. I don't think I will be able to earn 100,000 purple gold in my lifetime. Hearing the discussions of the caravan, Mu Yun, who had been chatting enthusiastically with Jianxin, also became interested. Turning his head to look at the portrait pasted on the city gate, he chuckled and said, I wonder what crime this person called Changyang Shoten committed for the Huayan sect to go through so much trouble to capture him. If he was a big shot with great strength, then it would make sense. But on the wanted list, it clearly states that he is only a primary saint. This is very strange. Could it be that a primary saint could do something that would make the Huayan sect so hateful? Could it be that this person called Changyang Shoten peeked at the daughter of the Huayan sect's sect master taking a bath? Hearing Mu Yun's mutterings, Jianxin couldn't help but laugh. He helplessly looked at Mu Yun and said with a smile, Brother Mu Yun, I have stayed in the kingdom of Jessen for more than 10 years and have heard a lot about the Huayan sect. But according to what I know, the Huayan sect's sect master only has 1 son and no daughter. Peeking at the daughter of the Huayan sect's sect master taking a bath is a bit unreasonable. Mu Yun rolled his eyes at Jianxin and said, What do you know? Who said that the Huayan sect's sect master doesn't have a daughter? Perhaps he just happens to have one. It's just that the outside world doesn't know about it. Jianxin helplessly shook his head. In his heart, he decided not to continue discussing the matter of whether or not the Huayan sect's sect master had a daughter. The caravan didn't encounter any obstructions and smoothly left the stronghold. After Jianxin's disguise, no one could recognize his true appearance. Moreover, this disguise technique was very high. Even though Jianshan had only used some ordinary materials to disguise himself, it was still flawless. No one could see through his disguise. Moreover, this disguise technique was something that had been passed down in Jianshan's previous world. Although it seemed simple, it was actually very profound and not easy to learn. In this world, there was probably no such disguise technique, so naturally no one would think of it. Jianshan's face didn't reveal any flaws, so he didn't have to worry about anyone seeing through his disguise. After leaving the stronghold, there was an endless plain. There were very few people on the plain, only scattered caravans walking on the road. This plain wasn't under the jurisdiction of any empire and was a chaotic area. This led to the frequent appearance of bandits and robbers. The caravans walking on this plain were either in groups or escorted by powerful mercenaries. This plain was very vast. The caravan walked on the plain for an entire day and only covered a quarter of the plain. If they wanted to reach the Fenglan Empire, they would have to cross this plain and then pass through a mountain range to reach the Fenglan Empire's stronghold. With the caravan's slow speed, it would take them at least 10 days to reach the Fenglan Empire's stronghold. After all, the caravan was carrying large caravans of goods and the road wasn't very smooth. Even if they wanted to speed up, they couldn't. When the sky darkened, the caravan stopped moving forward and camped in a relatively flat place. Nearly 100 tents surrounded the caravan, which was full of goods. Some of the coachmen skillfully unloaded the caravan and fed the horses. Smoke rose in spirals around the tents. Many of the mercenaries were sitting in groups of 3 or 5, chatting while making a fire to roast the meat of magical beasts or cooking some food to fill their stomachs. But among them, if they didn't know each other, then they belonged to the same mercenary group. Most of the mercenaries who were alone were silently sitting on the side eating the dry food that they had prepared beforehand. Jianshan also took out a tent that he had prepared beforehand from his space belt and then found a flat and dry place to set it up. As a mercenary group that didn't belong to any mercenary group and wasn't on the list of hired members of the caravan, Jianshan was completely responsible for all the consumption and necessities along the way. The caravan wouldn't give him any help. Just as Jianshan's tent was set up, Mu Yun suddenly appeared in front of Jianshan and said, "Jianshan, it seems that you also joined the caravan halfway. Where are you going?" Jianshan nodded and said, "I'm going to the Blue Moon Empire." "Brother Mu Yun, what about you?" Chapter 72. At night, Jianshan entered his tent after eating some rations. He sat down and cultivated with a few Class 1 monster cores in his hand. He could encounter danger at any time on the Tianyuan continent. Only with great strength could he ensure his safety. As a result, Jianshan did not want to waste any time on increasing his strength. Moreover, Jianshan knew that he could only return to the kingdom of Jessen and reunite with his family once he became powerful enough to not fear the Huayan sect. Otherwise, he would probably be hunted down by the Huayan sect as soon as he showed his face. It was extremely quiet outside. Only a few light footsteps could be heard from time to time. These were the mercenaries in charge of patrolling the area as they passed by Jianshan's tent. Time passed by quietly, and in the blink of an eye, it was already late at night. At this time, most of the mercenaries in the tents had already entered a state of deep sleep. Even the mercenaries in charge of patrolling the tents had drowsy looks and were in a very lax state. At this moment, a black streak of light suddenly appeared. Using the cover of the night, it quickly flew over from the distance and shot straight at one of the patrolling mercenaries. In the end, it silently struck the mercenary's throat. The black streak of light was clearly a kind of killing force. The mercenary did not even have the chance to cry out before his body collapsed to the ground. The black streak of light was extremely small and extremely fast. It was completely silent as it flew, making it difficult for anyone to detect it. Moreover, the merchant camp was extremely large, and the patrolling mercenary was far away by himself. As a result, no one noticed what had happened after he fell to the ground. After the mercenary fell to the ground, several more black streaks of light quickly shot over from the distance, killing all the patrolling mercenaries who were further away from the tent. Xianxian's tent was located at the outermost perimeter. Among the dead mercenaries, there just happened to be one that was less than 30 meters away from Xianxian's tent. Just as the mercenary that was closest to Xianxian's tent fell to the ground, Xianxian's ears slightly twitched as he sat cross-legged in his tent cultivating. His slightly closed eyes abruptly opened, and his eyes turned. Immediately after, Xianxian immediately bent over and carefully opened a gap in the tent's door to observe the situation outside. Just as Xianxian opened the door slightly to see what was happening outside, another black streak of light shot over from the distance at an extremely fast speed. It struck a patrolling mercenary in the distance, and the mercenary fell to the ground without making a single sound. Seeing this, Xianxian's expression changed slightly. He immediately understood that the merchant group had been attacked. However, with the experience of his past life, Xianxian did not panic at all. He immediately shouted from the tent, "Everyone, be careful. There's an enemy attack." Xianxian's shout was extremely loud, and everyone in the camp could hear it clearly. As soon as he finished speaking, the originally quiet camp immediately became noisy. Countless mercenaries quickly ran out of their tents. In just a short moment, the originally quiet camp was filled with hundreds of noisy mercenaries. Xianxian's words were extremely sensitive to the mercenaries who had been roaming the Tianyuan continent for a long time. As a result, when they heard Xianxian's shout, all the mercenaries ran out of their tents as quickly as possible. The mercenaries who had just run out of their tents habitually scanned their surroundings, but all they saw were their own people. They did not see any traces of the enemy. Enemy attack? Where is the enemy? Who was shouting just now? Where is the enemy? Where is the enemy? Who the F*CK was shouting randomly. Many mercenaries began to shout loudly. If they were to discover that someone was shouting randomly to mess with them, they would not easily let this person off. Not good, Captain Lang Tian, the patrolling du Milan has died. Just as many mercenaries were cursing, a loud voice drowned out all the curses of the mercenaries and rang out from afar. Hearing this, all the mercenaries fell silent. However, at this moment, another 3 black streaks of light shot over from the darkness at an extremely fast speed and struck the chests of 3 mercenaries. The mercenaries who were struck by the black streaks of light did not even have the chance to cry out before directly falling to the ground. Before the 3 mercenaries could fall to the ground, another 3 black streaks of light shot out from the darkness and struck the 3 mercenaries again. The black streaks of light constantly shot over from afar. Using the cover of the night and their completely silent flight, it was difficult to discover their existence. The black streaks of light shot out at an extremely fast rate. In less than a breath's time, over a dozen mercenaries were struck by the black streaks of light and fell to the ground. At this moment, someone finally cried out, "Everyone be careful, there's an enemy." Before the mercenary could finish his sentence, a black streak of light flashed by and shot straight into the mercenary's body. Afterward, the mercenary powerlessly fell to the ground. Everyone quickly scatter and find cover. A tall, middle-aged man with a scar on his face roared. He was dressed in a tight suit and had a tall build. After he finished speaking, a pair of fiery red hammers appeared in the middle-aged man's hands and he rushed alone in the direction of the black streaks of light. "Captain Langton, be careful." Seeing the middle-aged man actually rushing alone in the direction of the enemy, many mercenaries cried out in alarm one after another. Their voices were filled with worry. Just as the middle-aged man rushed out a few steps, over a dozen mercenaries who boasted of their strength rushed out and followed closely behind the middle-aged man. They formed a fan shape and rushed in the direction of the black streaks of light. The black streaks of light were still constantly flickering, but this time, the shooting angle of the black streaks of light had changed their target. Under the cover of the night, the undetectable black streaks of light were like sharp swords that shot towards the dozen mercenaries who were rushing over. However, since they dared to recklessly charge forward without knowing the enemy's situation, the strength of these mercenaries was definitely not weak. Leader Lang Tian, who was leading the charge, held a pair of fiery red hammers in his hands that flickered with a flame-like red glow. In the pitch-black night, The hammers were like bright lamps that were so eye-catching. Seeing the two black streaks of light shooting towards him, Captain Lang Tian's eyes revealed a cold smile. He suddenly swung the hammers in his hands and fiercely smashed them towards the two black streaks of light. With a light collision sound, Captain Lang Tian's hammers accurately struck the two black streaks of light. Afterwards, the black streaks of light silently disappeared. The black streaks of light that could easily take a person's life were actually so weak in Captain Lang Tian's hands. The dozen or so mercenaries following behind Captain Lang Tian were also extremely powerful. They did not fear the threat of the black streaks of light at all. Immediately, powerful saint force surged out from the saint weapons in their hands, and they directly dispersed the black streaks of light with a wave of their saint weapons. Just at this moment, a strange change occurred. Sharp, ear-piercing sounds of air being pierced rang out from the darkness in the distance. Countless arrows were shot over with ear-piercing sounds. There were so many arrows that they were as dense as locusts. Facing so many arrows, a few of the dozen or so mercenaries immediately stopped their charge and blocked the incoming arrows. Ding 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 ding. These arrows were all made of refined iron. When they collided with the saint weapons, the sound of metal clanging rang out. Captain Lang Tian and the mercenaries still did not stop their charge. Facing the dense rain of arrows, the mercenaries all roared out angrily. Powerful saint force surged out of their bodies, forming a barrier completely condensed from saint force around them. Although this barrier was weak, its defensive power was extremely strong. When the arrows made of refined iron struck their barrier, they could only cause it to tremble slightly. They were simply unable to break through this layer of defense. Brothers, kill! Just as the powerful mercenaries were about to charge into the enemy's camp, a loud and clear shout rang out from the darkness in the distance. Following the shout, earth-shaking battle cries rang out. In the darkness, a large number of black figures could be faintly seen suddenly appearing, rapidly charging towards the caravan's camp. The bandits have appeared. Everyone, prepare your bows and arrows. In the mercenary camp, a mercenary loudly shouted. Hearing this, many mercenaries immediately took out the iron longbows on their backs and nocked arrows. They aimed at the black figures in the distance, waiting for the bandits to enter the range of their arrows. Xianxia stood at the periphery of the group of mercenaries and looked at the black figures in the distance. His expression became a little solemn. Although the bandits were still far away from the camp and visibility was very low due to the darkness, with his eyesight and experience, he immediately determined that there were at least a few hundred bandits. They were not much fewer than the mercenaries in the caravan. Moreover, the few powerful mercenaries who had charged forward against the rain of arrows had already been dealt with by the experts in the enemy camp. Release the arrows. At this time, the bandits had already entered the range of the arrows. With the order of one person, the hundreds of mercenaries immediately released the arrows in their hands. Immediately, hundreds of iron arrows pierced through the air and shot towards the bandits in front. Although there were some powerful people in this group of bandits, most of them were not that strong. In just one round of arrow rain, more than a dozen of the bandits had fallen. 3 black streaks of light shot out from behind the group of bandits at an extremely fast speed, directly hitting the chest of 3 bow-wielding mercenaries. A finger-sized hole immediately appeared on the chest of the 3 mercenaries who were hit by the black streaks of light. They immediately fell to the ground and breathed their last. The black streaks of light shot out at an extremely fast rate, and each time there were 3 streaks of light. In just a short moment, 9 mercenaries had died under the black streaks of light. Seeing the wounds on the mercenaries' chests, a middle-aged man's face suddenly changed. He immediately called out, "Everyone be careful. There's someone with darkness-attributed saint force in the enemy camp." As he spoke, another 3 black streaks of light shot out from the night sky. One of the black streaks of light just happened to be aimed at the middle-aged man who had called out to warn everyone. The middle-aged man's strength was obviously not weak. His face sank, and a silver machete appeared in his right hand in an instant. With a flash of the machete, the middle-aged man had already swung down the machete in his right hand, slashing at the incoming black light. Bang! The black streak of light was completely condensed from energy. When the black streak of light collided with the machete in the middle-aged man's hand, there was a soft explosion. Afterward, the black streak of light silently dispersed. The middle-aged man's body swayed slightly, and his face immediately became stern. He said in a deep voice, "God damn it, there's actually 3 darkness-attributed Saint Force in the enemy camp, and they're all professional archers. In this region, only the Boundless Bandits have such strength." "Vice Captain Liu, what did you say? Are these bandits from the Boundless Bandits?" "Heavens, they're actually from the Boundless Bandits." Chapter 73. As soon as they heard the words Boundless Bandits, all the mercenaries' expressions changed drastically. Boundless Bandits. Jianshan's brows furrowed deeply. He was no stranger to the Boundless Bandits. Back then, whether it was in the library of Changyang Prefecture or in the library of Kargath Academy, he had read about the Boundless Bandits. According to the description of the Boundless Bandits in the books, they were extremely powerful and had existed for over 200 years. 200 years ago, when the Boundless Bandits were first born, they were already very powerful and would often appear in the borders of the surrounding kingdoms. At that time, the Boundless Bandits were a nightmare to all the caravans. This was because the Boundless Bandits were very ruthless. They never left any caravans alive after robbing them, and countless merchants and mercenaries had died at their hands. Moreover, the Boundless Bandits would occasionally attack some villages and cities with weak defenses. There was once a time when 2 Grade 3 cities were plundered by the Boundless Bandits, while a Grade 2 city was attacked by the Boundless Bandits. Although they did not manage to capture the Grade 2 city in the end, they still caused a lot of casualties in the Grade 2 city. More than a dozen villages were massacred. At that time, the Boundless Bandits had caused a bloodbath in the surrounding kingdoms, causing caravans to not dare to go to remote places and causing great losses to the various kingdoms. Because of this, the 4 kingdoms, the Kingdom of Jessen, the Kingdom of Blue Moon, the Kingdom of Wind, and the Kingdom of Wala, had gone to war. After sending people to investigate the Boundless Bandits' lair, they had sent troops to encircle and annihilate the Boundless Bandits several times. Unfortunately, the Boundless Bandits' strength was beyond everyone's expectations. Every encirclement and annihilation by the various kingdoms ended in failure and heavy casualties. After a few failed encirclements and annihilations, the various kingdoms actually sent out a top expert at the same time. A total of 4 top experts were gathered to head to the Boundless Bandits' stronghold, the Boundless Mountains. Not long after the top experts of the 4 kingdoms entered the Boundless Mountains, an earth-shattering explosion was heard from the depths of the mountains. The entire Boundless Mountains shook and collapsed. The explosion lasted for a full day and night before it gradually calmed down. During this time, 6 towering peaks of the Boundless Mountains collapsed. When the top experts of the 4 kingdoms came out, the 4 of them did not look very good. They left without saying anything. Within a day, the commanders of the 4 kingdoms who encircled the Boundless Mountains received an order from the king to immediately withdraw their troops and stop the encirclement and annihilation of the Boundless Mountains. Although no one saw with their own eyes what happened after the top experts of the 4 kingdoms entered the depths of the Boundless Mountains, anyone with half a brain could guess what exactly happened. This outcome was unacceptable to all the mercenaries and merchant groups. From then on, the Boundless Bandits' reputation rose to a peak. In the hearts of some mercenaries and merchants, the Boundless Bandits had become the incarnation of the Grim Reaper, deterring the surrounding kingdoms. However, the only thing that made everyone feel fortunate was that after the incident with the top experts of the 4 kingdoms, the Boundless Bandits had become much more low-key. Although there were still many merchants and mercenaries who died in their hands every year, the Boundless Bandits' appearance was not as frequent as before. They would only appear once a month and their methods were not as ruthless as before. This gave many merchants a chance to survive. However, the only downside was that the Boundless Bandits' appearance was uncertain. Therefore, even if some merchant groups wanted to avoid the Boundless Bandits, they could not figure out the exact time. Damn it, so what if it's the Boundless Bandits? I'll still chop off their heads. A mercenary glared at the boundless bandits in the distance with eyes full of hatred, not showing the slightest fear. In addition to him, many other mercenaries were also looking at the boundless bandits with eyes full of deep hatred and resentment. The boundless bandits had run amok in this area, robbing countless merchant groups and killing countless merchants and mercenaries over the years. Therefore, many of these mercenaries had relatives and friends who had died in the hands of the boundless bandits. In the hearts of these mercenaries, there was only deep hatred for the boundless bandits, and not the slightest bit of fear. As mercenaries who lived on the edge of the blade all year round, there were also many hot-blooded and unyielding men among them. Not everyone was afraid of death. More than a decade ago, my father died in the hands of the boundless bandits. Today, I'll avenge my father. A mercenary in his 20s stared at the approaching boundless mercenary group with bloodshot eyes. His tone was filled with grief, indignation, and intense hatred. A burly man with a valiant body and a bare upper body had eyes full of strong killing intent. He gritted his teeth and said, "Boundless bandits, you killed my elder brother 5 years ago. Today, even if I have to sacrifice my life, I'll drag you down with me and avenge my elder brother." The black light was still flashing. In just a short while, a few more mercenaries who were shooting arrows fell under this strange black light. The rest of the mercenaries found cover to avoid the black light, which was difficult to guard against, while shooting arrows at the rapidly approaching bandits. Seeing that the bandits were getting closer and closer, many of the mercenaries began to panic. The name Boundless Bandits had a huge impact on them. Many of them were scared out of their wits, and they didn't even have the courage to resist. After all, not everyone was fearless of death. There were still some among them who were timid and afraid of death. Noticing the situation of the mercenaries, a middle-aged man had a look of worry in his eyes. He shouted, "Don't be afraid, everyone. This is just a small unit of the Boundless Bandits. They are not necessarily stronger than us. As long as we work together, we will definitely be able to defeat them. Otherwise, the only thing that awaits us is death. Brothers, let's give it our all for the sake of survival." Hearing the middle-aged man's words, some of the cowardly mercenaries couldn't help but feel emboldened. These words were extremely motivating to some of them. Only by fighting would there be hope for survival. At this moment, the strong desire to survive made many of the mercenaries abandon the fear in their hearts and decide to fight to the death. The mercenaries tried their best to dodge the black light that was shooting at them from afar while shooting at the bandits in front of them with their bows and arrows. After nearly 100 people fell, the Boundless Bandits finally arrived in front of a group of mercenaries. At this time, the bows in the mercenaries' hands had already lost their effectiveness. All of the mercenaries abandoned their bows and arrows and summoned their holy weapons to fight the Boundless Bandits. Ah! Battle cries shook the sky from the crowd. The collision of weapons was densely packed, and miserable shrieks were constantly heard. Behind the bandits, in the darkness that couldn't be seen with the naked eye, black light constantly streaked through the air. Every time, it would accurately hit a mercenary. In just a short period of time, dozens of mercenaries had already died to this black light. Leader and the others are being held back by the enemy experts. Carlo, Gusingmir, the three of you come with me. We must hold back the 3 people hiding in the dark and shooting arrows. In the chaotic battlefield, a mercenary in armor shouted. As soon as he finished speaking, he leaped into the air and rushed in the direction of the black light. Just as the middle-aged man in armor left, another 3 mercenaries followed closely behind him and leaped into the air. Using the heads of the bandits as leverage, they rushed in the direction of the black light. Facing the 4 mercenaries who had leaped over their heads, the hundreds of bandits were actually helpless. Although the Boundless Bandit group's ferocious reputation had intimidated several kingdoms in the vicinity, this time, only a small group of bandits had come. Moreover, they weren't elites. The strongest among them had been blocked by the dozen or so experts who had rushed over earlier. At this moment, there was simply no one who could stop these 4 mercenaries who were not weak. 3 black lights once again shot towards the 4 mercenaries from the darkness in the distance. Clearly, The three people with darkness attribute Saint Force hiding in the distance had discovered the intentions of the four mercenaries. Just as the three black streaks shot out, another three black streaks appeared. A total of 6 streaks of black streaks lined up in 2 rows and shot towards the four mercenaries at an extremely fast speed without making a sound. The strength of these 4 mercenaries wasn't weak. They were far stronger than the mercenaries on guard duty. A weapon appeared in their hands at the same time, and they swung their weapons at the incoming black light. When the two collided, the black light shattered and dissipated. The speed of the 4 mercenaries was only a little slower, and they continued to rush in the direction of the black light. The 4 of them were very clear that if they didn't get rid of the 3 people hiding in the dark, it would bring a huge loss to their camp. Although the 3 mercenary groups had several hundred people in total, they could only be regarded as a low-level mercenary group in the mercenary world of the Tianyuan continent. Most of the mercenaries in the groups were still at the level of saints and great saints. There were even very few people who had reached the level of saint masters. Only the captains and vice-captains possessed the strength of great saint masters. However, the 3 captains and vice-captains had already been occupied by the bandits in the enemy camp, so they were unable to deal with the 3 archers. As expected, when the 4 experts disappeared from everyone's sight, the black lights no longer shot over. It did not matter if the 4 experts were able to keep the 3 archers busy or not, they had at least bought some precious time for the mercenaries. After all, the black lights were silent and difficult to detect under the cover of the night. They were extremely fast as well, so some of the weaker mercenaries were unable to dodge them at all. Without any potential danger, the mercenaries no longer needed to be on guard against the black lights that could shoot at them at any time. They all unleashed their full battle prowess, clashing with the bandits in an intense battle. At that moment, all the mercenaries cast aside their fear of the bandits. For the sake of survival, all of them did their best to kill the bandits, all for the sake of obtaining the final victory. Deafening cries filled the battlefield as the sounds of weapons colliding constantly rang out. Blood quickly dyed the ground red from the splattering blood. In just a short while of battle, over a dozen people from both sides had already collapsed. Xianxia had now joined the battle as well. Even though he was only a saint, his battle prowess would definitely shock everyone. Xianxia used profound footwork as he dodged the attacks from all directions. A silver sword that was only 2 fingers wide and 1 meter long constantly stabbed out with lightning-like speed. His sword stabbed out so quickly that only a tiny flash of silver could be seen. It was impossible to see the sword with the naked eye. Chapter 74. Xianxia was dealing with a group of enemies on his own. The constant blood-curdling screams and the bloody scene in front of him had already become a common sight to him. It didn't leave any impression on him at all. Xianxia's sword continued to stab out as the boundless bandits fell one by one. In front of Xianxia's lightning-fast swordsmanship, the bandits who were on the same level as Xianxia simply couldn't last more than 3 moves. There were even quite a few who were directly stabbed in the throat by Xianxia. Although Xianxia's strength could only be considered as the weakest amongst the mercenaries, but in terms of the number of bandits he had killed, no one could compare to him. In just a few breaths of time, more than a dozen bandits had fallen under Xianxia's sword. Xianxia's silver-white light wind sword was already stained red with blood. Even so, Xianxia's coarse clothes were still clean and neat. There wasn't a single drop of blood on them, unlike the other mercenaries who were covered in blood. Unknowingly, Xianxia had already infiltrated deep into the bandit camp. Right now, within a 20-meter radius of him, there were only bandits from the boundless bandits. There wasn't a single mercenary present, and the mercenaries were all grouped up in groups of 3 to 5 to fight against the bandits. Kill! 3 bandits who were closest to Xianxia let out a battle cry as they rushed towards Xianxia. Raising their weapons, they slashed towards Xianxia's head. Xianxia quickly took a step forward. His movements were like that of a ghost as he arrived in front of one of the bandits. At the same time, the light wind sword in his hand became a red ray of light as it pierced towards the bandit's throat. Xianxia was already proficient in fast swordsmanship, so the speed of his sword was even faster. The bandit didn't even have time to react. All he could see was a red ray of light flashing past his throat. After that, he felt a slight numbness in his throat. It was as if something was blocking his throat, making it difficult for him to breathe. Following that, fresh red blood began to flow from his neck. The bandit didn't even have the chance to make a sound as his body slowly fell backwards. At the last moment, the bandit didn't even understand how he died. Perhaps, he didn't even know that his throat had been pierced by Jianxin's lightning-fast sword. This was because Jianxin's swordsmanship was so fast that the bandit didn't even have time to react. Moreover, when the thin sword pierced through his throat, the bandit didn't feel any pain at all. After the light wind sword pierced through the bandit's throat, Jianxin's movements didn't slow down at all. At this time, the other two bandits were already in front of him, their weapons already slashing towards his body. Facing the attacks of the two bandits, Jianxin's expression didn't reveal the slightest trace of panic. His face was as calm as water as he immediately pulled out the light wind sword from the bandit's throat. With a mysterious footwork, his body moved 2 meters to the side like a ghost, dodging the attacks of the two bandits. At the same time, the blood-stained light wind sword in his hand pierced towards the throat of one of the bandits at a speed that the naked eye couldn't follow. The light wind sword didn't meet with any resistance and easily avoided the reaction of the bandit, stabbing deep into his throat. Just as the light wind sword was about to pierce the throat of the bandit, Jianxin immediately pulled it out and stabbed towards the third bandit. Every strike of Jianxin's sword was extremely fast, to the point that the naked eye couldn't follow it. Almost no one in the same realm as him would be able to dodge his sword. As for the third bandit, he couldn't even see the shadow of the sword before the light wind sword had already pierced through his throat. To Jianxin, killing people was already a common occurrence. The bloody scene in front of him was already a common occurrence, so he didn't even bat an eyelid. After dealing with the bandits, Jianxin didn't stop and continued to stab the bandits around him with his light wind sword. The battle was very fierce. At this critical moment that concerned their lives, no one could stay out of it. Even the coachmen who had not reached the Saint Realm had gathered in groups of 3 to 5. They gathered their strength and cooperated with some mercenaries to attack the bandits who were alone. The intense battle caused the number of people on both sides to decrease rapidly. Whether it was the bandits or the mercenaries, they all suffered extremely heavy casualties. Aside from Jianxin, who still maintained his clean clothes, everyone else was covered in blood. There were even a few people who were completely bathed in blood. They seemed like people made of blood, and their bodies were covered in wounds of various sizes. Although the bandits outnumbered the mercenaries by a lot, their individual strength and teamwork were far inferior to the mercenaries. As the two sides fought, the number of people who died was much higher than the number of mercenaries. Even so, the number of people on both sides could barely maintain a balance. Jianxin continued to weave through the bandits, calmly dodging the attacks coming from all directions. The light wind sword in his hand was completely stained with blood, and with every stab, it would either directly hit the heart of a bandit, killing them, or leave a deep wound on their body. The surrounding bandits couldn't do anything to Jianxin. Not only were they unable to see Jianxin's sword, they couldn't even hit him with their weapons. This was because there were many times when their weapons were about to hit Jianxin, Jianxin would always be able to dodge by a hair's breadth. As a result, the bandits couldn't even touch Jianxin's clothes. Instead, more and more people fell to Jianxin's sword. More and more bandits died at Jianxin's hands. Gradually, the surrounding bandits began to realize how powerful Jianxin was, and began to deliberately distance themselves from him. After all, in a situation where they were no match for him, no one was willing to throw away their lives for nothing. "Sire, you have good skills. Let me have a go at you." At this time, a deep voice entered Jianxin's ears. Just as the voice fell, a light green light shot towards Jianxin at an extremely fast speed. Feeling the speed of the light green light and the powerful energy it emitted, Jianxin's expression suddenly changed. Just from this attack, he could tell that this person was very strong. So strong that even with his current strength, he didn't dare to face this person head-on. Otherwise, he was afraid that this person's attack would be enough to injure him. This light green light was very fast. In an instant, it had arrived in front of Jianshan. At the same time, Jianshan's expression became very dignified. He immediately controlled his body and tried his best to dodge to the side. The light green light almost brushed past Jianshan's shoulder and fiercely bombarded the ground. With a loud boom, a deep hole was created in the ground. Jianshan's figure quickly retreated and immediately pulled away from the opponent. In the blink of an eye, he had retreated 5 zhang away. When he stopped, Jianshan raised his head and looked. Although it was now dark, with the help of the stubbornly burning bonfire in the distance and his extraordinary eyesight, he could still clearly see the person in front of him. He saw that the person was a middle-aged man of about 30 or 40 years old. The middle-aged man had an average build and didn't look very strong. His appearance was also very ordinary. Coupled with the cloth clothes he was wearing, he looked like a very ordinary person. If you removed the large glaive in his right hand that was emitting a faint green light, then this middle-aged man in front of him looked like a completely ordinary person. There was nothing about him that could attract attention. Just as Jianshan was sizing up this middle-aged man, the middle-aged man's calm gaze was also sizing up Jianshan. At the same time, the middle-aged man said, "Your strength is very good. Your opponent should be me." The middle-aged man's voice was very calm. His gaze was fixed on Jianshan as if there was only Jianshan in his eyes. He showed an indifferent expression to the sounds of killing all around him. Jianshan looked around and observed the surroundings. This middle-aged man clearly had quite a high status among the bandits. Ever since he appeared, all the bandits within a certain range of Jianshan all avoided him. Even though there were quite a few bandits around Jianshan, when they saw the middle-aged man facing off against Jianshan, none of them dared to approach him. They all went to find other mercenaries to fight. Jianshan's face became stern. He knew that this battle was definitely the first battle of life and death since he had come to this world. Even though he had gone through hundreds of battles and was confident that he was invincible among those of the same level, Jianshan did not have much confidence in killing this middle-aged man. Just from the strength of the middle-aged man's attack, Jianshan could tell that the middle-aged man's strength far exceeded his own. At the same time, the middle-aged man also possessed wind-attributed saint force. In terms of speed, he was no slower than Jianshan. The middle-aged man stared at Jianshan as he slowly picked up the large glaive that was slightly taller than him. A faint azure light revolved around the glaive as strands of wind revolved around the middle-aged man's body. Noticing the middle-aged man's movements, Jianshan's mind was on high alert as well. Even though he had mastered the profound footwork, he did not dare to be careless against an opponent who was much stronger than him. Moreover, the opponent had saint force of the wind attribute and specialized in speed. Ha! Suddenly, the middle-aged man let out an explosive roar as he rushed towards Jianshan. The middle-aged man's speed was extremely fast and arrived in front of Jianshan in the blink of an eye. His glaive glowed with a brilliant azure light as it slashed towards Jianshan's neck at a speed that was hard to see with the naked eye. Jianshan's head was slightly tilted to the side as the glaive brushed past his head. After the glaive passed, a few strands of black hair slowly fell to the ground. At the same time that his head was tilted to the side, Jianshan's body suddenly crouched as he took a large step forward. His body quickly leaned forward as he closed the distance between him and the middle-aged man. The light wind sword in his hand formed a blood-red ray of light as it pierced towards the middle-aged man's heart with lightning speed. Facing a middle-aged man who was much stronger than him, Jianshan had already used all of his strength in this attack. He didn't hold back in the slightest. The speed of the sword was so fast that it had almost reached the limit of what Jianshan was capable of. In an instant, the tip of the light wind sword had already reached the middle-aged man's chest. At the tip of the sword, Jianshan's sword qi had already pierced through the man's body. Seeing the tip of the light wind sword about to reach his chest, the middle-aged man's face changed greatly as his eyes were filled with disbelief. However, the middle-aged man's reaction was also very quick. At this critical moment, a large amount of saint force was released from his body and formed a powerful shockwave that collided with the light wind sword that was about to reach his chest. At the same time, a portion of the Saint Force formed a seemingly weak but extremely sturdy barrier around his body. Chapter 75. Like a hot knife through butter, the light wind sword pierced through the middle-aged man's Saint Force. Even so, the speed of the light wind sword was a bit slower than before. When the light wind sword pierced through the middle-aged man's Saint Force barrier, the light wind sword's tip paused for a moment before breaking through the barrier and continuing towards the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man's 2 layers of defense only lasted for less than a breath of time before they were broken. Even so, it was enough to buy him enough time. By the time the light wind sword broke through the 2 layers of defense, the middle-aged man had already retreated a few meters away with the help of his wind-attributed Saint Force. The middle-aged man stood several meters away as he stared at Xianxia, who had already sheathed his sword. His face became serious as he muttered, "What a fast speed!" Xianxia calmly stared at the middle-aged man without saying a word. In his heart, he felt that it was a pity. That sword strike just now was already the limit of his strength. Moreover, it was also the fastest speed he could achieve. If his full-strength attack was dodged by the middle-aged man, then it would be very difficult for him to kill the middle-aged man. After all, the middle-aged man's strength was much higher than his own. Moreover, he had the Saint Force of the wind element and was an expert in speed. It could be said that Xianxia had already lost the upper hand against the middle-aged man. No matter how exquisite his swordsmanship was, it would all be useless if it was not so fast that the opponent could not react to it. Moreover, Xianxia did not dare to clash with the middle-aged man in a head-on battle when the difference in strength was so great. Your strength should have reached the level of a Saint Master, right? Xianxia calmly stared at the middle-aged man and asked. The middle-aged man didn't hide anything and said, "Correct, my strength is indeed at the intermediate Saint Master level." The middle-aged man paused for a moment as he stared at Xianxia with a strange light in his eyes and asked, "You aren't very strong and your Saint Force isn't of the wind element, but your sword strike just now was so fast that even I almost couldn't dodge it. I don't know how you managed to achieve such speed." The middle-aged man's voice was filled with curiosity. Right now, he really did want to know the answer to this question. As someone who possessed wind-attributed Saint Force, he would not care if someone surpassed him in any other aspect. However, if someone surpassed him in speed, it would be very difficult for him to just let it go, especially when the person who surpassed him in speed was weaker than him and did not possess wind-attributed Saint Force. The middle-aged man could not help but feel curious. "Sorry, I can't answer that question." Xianxia's voice was very calm. Hearing this, the middle-aged man's eyes turned cold and he said coldly, "If you tell me what method you used to increase your speed, I can let you go today. Otherwise, humph, do you really think that you are a match for me with that little bit of speed? Whether I'm your opponent or not, you're welcome to try." Facing the middle-aged man's threat, Xianxia wasn't afraid at all. Instead, he exuded a strong fighting spirit. In his hand, the light wind sword was already dyed red with blood and emitted a hazy sword aura. The middle-aged man stared at Xianxia with a strange light in his eyes. In his heart, he still had some misgivings about Xianxia's sword strike because the speed of Xianxia's sword was so fast that even he couldn't match it. Even though he had the wind element which gave him an innate advantage in terms of speed, he still couldn't unleash an attack as fast as Xianxia's. In order to dodge that sword strike, he had already used all of his strength. If he had been just a step slower, he didn't doubt that his heart would have been pierced through. Because of this, the middle-aged man was now somewhat afraid of Xianxia. Moreover, the middle-aged man looked at Xianxia's spiritual energy cloak and couldn't tell how many times Xianxia could unleash such a fast attack. If Xianxia could unleash an endless stream of attacks at the same speed, then the middle-aged man would have a hard time dealing with it. Seeing that the middle-aged man wasn't attacking, Xianxia was happy to be at ease. Just like that, he faced off against the middle-aged man. Xianxia was extremely clear that it was basically impossible for him to kill the middle-aged man when the middle-aged man wasn't any slower than him. Right now, he could only keep the middle-aged man busy so that he wouldn't kill the weaker mercenaries. Once the experts of the mercenary group returned, he would directly throw the middle-aged man to them to deal with. The battle in the field didn't stop because of Jianchen and the middle-aged man's standoff. The sounds of killing continued, and more corpses of mercenaries and bandits fell to the ground. The ground was completely dyed red with blood, and there were even small puddles of blood on the uneven ground. The bandits were still fighting with all their might. Those who were able to survive until the end were either smart or had outstanding strength. Currently, the number of mercenaries and bandits was still at a relatively balanced stage. After the middle-aged man and Jianchen's standoff, the middle-aged man finally made his move again. The large glaive in his hand emitted a light green light, and in the darkness of the night, it was like a bright light. Holding the 2-meter-long glaive, the middle-aged man once again rushed towards Jianchen. Seeing the middle-aged man rushing towards him, Jianchen's eyes flashed with a sharp light. His right hand gripped the light wind sword even tighter as he took the initiative to meet the middle-aged man head-on. The middle-aged man raised his faintly glowing glaive and directly swung it down at Jianchen's head. He moved extremely quickly. Facing the attack of a mid-level Saint Master, Jianchen didn't plan to meet it head-on. Instead, he nimbly dodged the attack and counterattacked. But just as Jianchen's sword was about to strike out, the middle-aged man's glaive suddenly changed direction in midair. With a whistling sound, the glaive flew towards Jianchen's light wind sword. Jianchen's face slightly changed as he immediately pulled back his light wind sword. From the beginning to the end, he didn't want to meet the glaive head-on. Jianchen's light wind sword was his life-bound saint weapon. His entire life was tied to this seemingly weak light wind sword. If the light wind sword was damaged, then not only would Jianchen lose all of his martial arts, his life would also be in danger. In the Tianyuan continent, there were many cases where the owner of a saint weapon had died because of it. However, even though a saint weapon was condensed from saint qi, once it was summoned out of the body, it would become incomparably hard. Moreover, it would also become stronger as the owner's strength increased. Unless the difference in strength was too great, then a saint weapon would not be easily damaged. The middle-aged man's current strength was already at the intermediate Saint Master level, which was 2 whole levels higher than Jianchen. Although Jianchen's light wind sword and the glaive head-on would not necessarily cause too much damage to the light wind sword, the powerful recoil would still be too much for Jianchen to bear. Therefore, no matter what, Jianchen would not dare to meet the middle-aged man head-on. After all, the only one who would suffer would be himself. Once again dodging the middle-aged man's attack, the middle-aged man's defense revealed a small opening. Jianchen's eyes flashed as he took advantage of this rare opportunity. Like a ghost, Jianchen silently appeared behind the middle-aged man. The light wind sword in his hand emitted a sharp sword qi that transformed into a blood-red light as it pierced towards the middle-aged man's back. The long sword pierced through the air, creating a sharp sound as if the air itself was being sliced apart. The sword's speed was even faster than before, reaching the middle-aged man's back in an instant. But before the tip of the sword could make contact with the middle-aged man's back, the sword qi emitted from the tip of the sword had already pierced through the middle-aged man's back, piercing through his skin. Feeling the sharp pain from his back, the middle-aged man's expression changed greatly, but he didn't show any signs of panic. He was already prepared for Jianchen's extremely fast attack. Immediately, a powerful Saint Qi surged out from his body and condensed into an energy barrier on his back to block the sword. At the same time, the middle-aged man's body began to glow with a light green light. At this moment, he had already raised his speed to the limit, leaving behind a series of afterimages. Just as Jianchen's light wind sword was about to pierce his back, the middle-aged man had already moved half a meter to the side, escaping from the attack range of the light wind sword. The middle-aged man guessed that for Jianchen to be able to pierce out with such speed, he must have used all of his strength. At this moment, his defense was already at its lowest, so the middle-aged man took advantage of this rare opportunity. After dodging Jianchen's attack, he immediately raised his glaive up high. The glaive in his hand emitted a light green glow that gradually turned into a dazzling lamp under the night sky. The glaive left behind a beautiful green glow in the air as it slashed towards Genshin at an extremely fast speed. This glaive contained the full strength of the middle-aged man's attack. After exchanging blows with Genshin several times, the middle-aged man had already experienced how difficult it was to deal with Genshin. With Genshin's rich battle experience, the middle-aged man didn't leave any openings for him to take advantage of. Whether it was attacking or dodging, the middle-aged man's moves were all flawless, leaving no openings for the middle-aged man to take advantage of. But this time, the middle-aged man had borrowed Genshin's full strength attack to deal a heavy blow to Genshin. Because of this, the middle-aged man didn't hold back at all. The glaive cut through the air at an extremely fast speed. If it had been someone weaker, they wouldn't even have had the time to react. Hua! With a boom, the glaive that was enveloped in a layer of azure light chopped down on Genshin's head without any obstruction. It passed through his body and landed heavily on the ground without slowing down at all. With a boom, the glaive that contained the middle-aged man's full strength sank deeply into the ground. The powerful saint force on the glaive created a meter-wide crater in the surrounding soil. As dust flew into the air, Genshin's figure was directly swallowed up. However, the middle-aged man did not show any joy at all. Instead, he became extremely stern. An afterimage! The middle-aged man exclaimed in his heart. However, just as this thought appeared in his mind, a strong sense of crisis spread throughout the middle-aged man's heart. The middle-aged man did not hesitate at all. His body leaned to the side with all his strength as if it was a conditioned reflex. At the same time, he immediately pulled out the large glaive in his hand from the ground and slashed behind him without looking. Ding! With a crisp sound, the middle-aged man's large glaive collided with a thin longsword covered in blood that had suddenly appeared and clashed with it. Welcome to Immortal Cultivation Audiobooks, your gateway to the mystical world of Xianxia. Dive into legendary tales of martial arts, spiritual growth, and immortal ascension. Here, we bring you full-length English audiobooks of the best Wuxia and Xianxia stories, from young prodigies to ancient sect wars. Perfect for fans of Against the Gods, Martial World, and tales of demons and gods.